This is greytFM.
When it comes to work, one's profession, their job, a 9 to 5, it's easy for systems and the people working within them to become really desensitized to each other's needs. And this is a phenomenon, this desensitization is a phenomenon that has plagued many people at a workplace and plagued businesses too. The environment that an organization facilitates really paves the way for success or low success, depending on how you do it eventually. Because, at the end of the day, a workplace is an ecosystem, one that works best on human principles of respect, safety, and empathy. Hi, everyone. Ahalya here. Welcome to another podcast in our series greytFM, the official podcast from greytHR. On the table today, the concept of psychological safety in the workplace. Now, I have to admit, I came across this phrase very recently, but it's been established for quite a while now. And according to a McKinsey global survey conducted during the pandemic, and I quote, only a handful of business leaders often demonstrate the positive behaviors that can instill this climate termed psychological safety in their workforce. It may seem like the buzzword for today, but a very quick Google search, like I said, will tell you that it's not very new, actually. It's just being recognized in full now. So we've got a lot of questions. So please welcome Ayatakshee Sarkar, professor at XLRI Jamshedpur, and our guest for today. Hi, Ayatakshee.
Hello, Ahalya.
And just for a little bit more context about, your career, Ayatakshee is also a visiting fellow in the University of Cambridge, UK. And prior to her academic work, she's worked with major industries such as Schneider Electric, HP, and Allstate India in these areas of employee learning and development. Her research interests are coping behaviors, workplace toxicity, well-being, and indigenous psychology. So kind of the perfect blend of everything that we need to discuss today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I really feel honored to have this platform where I can talk about psychological safety, which is a very important topic at the workplace.
Absolutely. So why don't you start us off with the definition of it, Ayatakshee? Because like I said, it's not new, but it seems new. So tell us a little bit about what we're dealing with here.
So I would go back to the history of psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
So historically, in the organizational research, psychological safety found its roots in early discussion of what it takes to produce organizational change.
Okay.
Rather, in 1965, two MIT professors, Edgar Chen and Warren Bennis, they argued that psychological safety was indeed essential for making people secure and capable of changing their behavior in response to shifting organization challenges. And later, he argued that psychological safety helps people to overcome their defensiveness or any kind of learning anxiety that they may face, and that occurs when they are presented with data that contradict their own value systems. Also, if an organization is psychologically safer, individuals are free to focus on collective goals and problem prevention rather than being defensive or self-protective about their motive.
Right.
In fact, people are more likely to believe that they will be given the benefit of doubt, which is again a defining characteristic of psychological safety.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a very comprehensive definition of psychological safety and brings me actually to what really interested me. If you were to look at a workplace, right, I'd actually say we're dealing with an organization here. What would you say are the criteria that make that workplace psychologically safe? What are the boxes that it needs to tick?
It takes a lot of efforts, especially from the leaders as well as the HR, to make an organization or a workplace psychologically safer. So some of the components that I would like to mention are, first, they need to practice active listening with curiosity. So when I say active listening with curiosity, it means that the leader, when they kind of hear into the perspective and thoughts of their team members, they should weigh in. The next aspect that I could think of is promoting a culture of respect in the organization. If a team member engages in, say, undermining or shaming or any behavior that discourages others from speaking up, a leader needs to be wary about the behavior. They shouldn't ignore this. The third one is, which I feel is very important, is leading by example.
Right.
So anyone in a position of responsibility should not only preach, but they should also set an example for the rest of the team members. Again, something which I closely feel from the core of my heart is, as a leader, one must embrace vulnerability. According to Edmondson, and I quote, leaders owning their vulnerability is in fact a mark of true strength. It shows a willingness to improve and a recipe for encouraging open and honest feedback. So when leaders acknowledge their own mistakes, it allows the team and the organization to learn and improve. I unquote. The last aspect, which again I think is very important, is empowering from a place of privilege.
Okay.
So if a team member is someone who isn't underrepresented in the community, it becomes the leader's effort to leverage the privilege to empower the underrepresented colleague who belongs to the team.
And that also brings me to the understanding that depending on the levels of psychological safety, your organization is going to experience either negative or positive impacts, right? So maybe let's focus on the positive first. Higher levels of psychological safety must mean higher levels of success. So what are some of the more tangible positive impacts of a psychologically safe workplace that you can share with us that might motivate people to make this a priority?
Yeah, of course, there are plenty of benefits that an organization would kind of savor if the climate is psychologically safer. So if a workplace is psychologically safer, then the knowledge hiding behaviors reduce a lot.
Okay.
Second thing would be the employee voice behavior. Employees feel more connected with their leaders and they feel more safe and secure to voice out their opinions, which again creates a culture of innovation and creativity at the workplace. Also, to a great extent, the job involvement and job performance improves a lot at the workplace. So people feel more aligned to the work, thus the meaningfulness at the workplace enhances. So I think these are some of the tangible benefits that the organization can savor if they have a psychologically safe workplace.
Right. Okay. I mean, that all adds up, by the way. It seems pretty intuitive, actually, to sort of facilitate a psychologically safe workplace. It's a wonder why we don't, talk more about this and pay more attention to it. And that brings me then to the repercussions of not being a psychologically safe workplace. I think, all of us can empathize with each other when it comes to the experience of working in a place that just wasn't good for you mentally, right? So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? What are the biggest deterrents that would come out of that?
It can be horrendous if an organization is not, and I have used a very extreme word. Of course, the first thing is that the motivation of an individual decreases a lot, and that creates a downward spiral due to their production decreases, their efficiency, effectivity decreases.
Right.
Also their learning also steeps down to a great extent because they do not feel safe to voice out their opinion, and then to add on, it may increase some of the negative behaviors like harassment, bullying, or even incivility.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes Ayatakshee, the more you speak about this, the more I'm thinking that if workplaces become psychologically safe one by one, maybe the world might get there too. And that'll be a day for all of us to live in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So an interesting idea also, because, if this isn't something that I think you can say this quarter, we're going to take up psychological safety and yes, now it has been accomplished, right? I'm sure it happens in phases, but are there like demarcated phases that people need to pay attention to, or is it not at all a one size fits all thing?
Again, a very interesting question. So first of all, I would like to tell you that creating a culture which is psychologically safer is not a short-term goal, okay, for an organization. Rather, it's a long-term objective for an organization, and it's a process. So it will not happen overnight after a team meeting or over a cup of coffee where the team members and the leaders decide that, okay, from tomorrow we will create a culture of psychological safe environment. So the entire thing is a process. Timothy Clark has clearly delineated some of the essential stages of psychological safety, which I would like to touch base upon. So the first thing is the inclusion stage. So in this stage, the basic human need of connecting and belonging is taken care of.
Right.
So in this, a team member must feel safe and accepted to be who they are, which is the leader need to be mindful of. The second is the learner safety. So what happens in this stage is that the leader need to make the team member feel safe to learn, ask questions, experiment with whatever resources they have. They also need to feel open to giving as well as receiving feedback.
Right.
So that is again something which is very important that the leader need to take care of. The third is the contributor safety. So here what happens, the member, once he or she feels comfortable that they can ask or learn anything or experiment with anything, they feel a little bit confident of making a valuable contribution about their skills.
Right.
And the last would be the what Dr. Timothy Clark says is challenger safety. So here what happens is, after they feel confident of making a meaningful contribution to their team, they should now feel safe enough to challenge the status quo when they see an opportunity for a change or any kind of improvements that is required in the team or in the organization as a. Creating an environment of psychological safe workplace is a process.
Definitely a process. That's true.
This is greytFM.
And speaking of, it's also possible that people are like, no, this sounds difficult. We've got so many other things on our plate. Why should we now sit and pay attention to psychological safety? I think through our conversation now, we've realized the importance of it and the value that it brings to the success of your organization. So that could be a pretty good motivator. But what are some of the challenges that one might face establishing this kind of safety in a workplace?
So, of course, as I said, that creating a culture of psychological safe workplace is a process, and to create this process as a long-term goal of an organization, it will definitely undergo through some challenges. The first is the organization level challenges, which I can think of is the hierarchy. And this hierarchy is mostly prevalent in the traditional patriarchal organization, where there are many levels. And in these levels, people who are into the lower levels, they feel there is a feeling of inferiority or insecurity among them, and therefore they kind of fear to voice out their opinion. Again, there is, apart from organization level barrier, we also have something called a team-based barrier, which is at the team level. And that happens mostly when there is a lack of knowledge, amongst the team members. And this perceived lack of knowledge is often attributed to lack of awareness at times, or, and this lack of awareness again creates some kind of anxiety where they feel, if they say something incorrect or if they appear to be incorrect or imperfect, then there can be some problem in their career. So that is again something which they need to look after. And then on an individual level, I think personality, it plays a very important role, and it can be a barrier to psychological safety. For example, people with dominating personalities, particularly those in the leadership role, say an authoritarian leadership, that can act as a barrier to create a culture of psychological safety.
Okay, got you. So some very valid things that we need to keep in mind. Once again, given the sort of cultural nature of something like this, it can be a little difficult for people to pin down things that they need to do in order to, create this kind of culture. So what is your advice to HR teams and members of organizations to proactively take psychological safety ahead and make it a priority?
So to make a culture which is psychologically safer, it's not a responsibility of the HR only. Even the business leaders are equally responsible to create a culture which is psychologically safer for the employees. So I think the very first thing that they need to do is they need to assess the current climate of the organization. So when I say assess the current climate of the organization, they need to ask some of the questions like, Does their talent feel safe enough to ask questions in the team meetings?
Mm-hmm.
Do they even feel safe to fail, or do they fear whistleblowing?
Mm-hmm.
Then the second important thing, when especially this is for again for the recruitment and the selection process, and especially for the HR, that they need to focus mostly on hiring uh, people for cognitive diversity. So we all have heard about creating a diverse workplace. So
Mm-hmm.
when we think of diverse workplace, we normally think of gender wise diversity or racial or age diversity, but we quite often ignore this aspect of cognitive diversity. Cognitive diversity is again another aspect which the leaders need to be mindful of, because it provides perspective or information processing style, varied perspective or information processing style. Another which I can think of is having an open, honest conversation, create a sense of belonging, which we have already talked about. Last but not the least, I also feel that leader need to be aware of their attitude. It's because most managers are in fact the root cause of their poor performing teams.
Right.
So for example, like there's a bank which is called a New Resource Bank in US, and they have sent an employee survey asking what they believed contributed to the company's poor work morale. And very obviously, most of the workers blamed their CEO. They saw him as very much overbearing and unempathetic about others' emotions. So the CEO came to know about this, and despite all the skills he had developed through his years of management education
Mm-hmm.
and professional development, he had never been directed to take a long look in the mirror and ask questions about who he was or what he valued and what it really meant to be a leader.
Right.
So, so becoming mindful of the attitude, becoming empathetic and compassionate towards the team members is very essential.
Absolutely. Very, very valid observations there, Ayatakshee. And I think I'd like to wrap up today's conversation with a really interesting idea, which is psychological safety in the hybrid work model. This isn't the same sort of organizational or workplace structure that, we may have established psychological safety in. And in fact, a Harvard Business Review piece spoke about the changing nature of psychological safety in a hybrid work model. The same rules just can't apply. We definitely have to, find a better fit. So what is your take on how psychological safety is going to play out in the hybrid work model in the coming years?
Yeah, this is again a very relevant question, especially the changing nature of work.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a hybrid work environment, there are definitely clear challenges to creating psychological safety. In fact, hybrid teams don't have the direct access to one another that in-person teams do.
Right.
And without much day-to-day communication opportunity for calibration and, the relational comfortability can be difficult, and therefore psychological safety can be a little harder to build. Having said that, we do have enough, means through which we can create a psychological safe climate even in a hybrid work environment. So the first thing which I can think of is creating a socialization opportunities amongst the team members.
Mm-hmm.
So to create space for these kind of connections, leaders can simply bake in 5 extra minutes into each hybrid team meeting for catching up, or maybe intentionally checking in on remote team members just to see how they are doing. Again, there can be a model receptivity to feedback. So when I say model receptivity to feedback, I again hint towards the leaders, where leaders seem like a bigger deal than it actually is in a hybrid work model. And as a leader, recognizing when they have made a mistake or asking for productive feedback and implementing that feedback can actually go a long way. I mean, it is also some kind of showing the team that they are really serious about creating a psychological safety workplace. That's all I can think right now.
No, I mean, that's not all. That's quite valuable. Some very, very interesting perspectives that you've brought to the fore today, Ayatakshee, in this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us and giving us the lowdown on this very, very novel. It may not be new, but it's definitely novel in terms of the actual application, psychological safety in the workplace. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's about it for this conversation on greytFM, the official podcast series from greytHR. But as I sign off, I'm reminding you that we'll be back with some more engaging and interesting, eye-opening conversations with some of the leading experts in HR in India today. So thanks so much for tuning in, everybody, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, stay safe and stay curious.
This is greytFM.